Hey everyone, so this is going to be a support to the lecture that we've already had um, on February 17th. So again, I want you to focus on the importance of location, particularly in train to Pakistan, but I also want you to remind yourselves of how location and place has changed from Train to Pakistan until now, but also the characters in Train to Pakistan understand place, understand India in a new way because of the partition. So before we talk about all that, as long as we rule India, we are the greatest power in the world. If we lose it, we shall straightway drop to a third-rate power. This is a quote from Lord Curzon in 1901. Why are we talking about this? Because it's really important for us to just contextualize the importance India had within the British Empire. India was known as the jewel of the British crown, and so we talked about in class sort of the relationships that you would see often between colonial forces and the colonized, and we talked about like sort of how that was parallel to things that are going on outside of India. But I also think it's important to understand the relationship this foreign presence had to Indians as not just the silly story that I gave on the second or third day of class with Teresa, but as a relationship in which both parties sort of rely on each other. So yeah, you see here Lord Curzon talking about the importance India has for the Britishers, but to also understand some of the important technologies, industries that India sort of relied on Britishers for. I think it's also a good idea to understand this relationship as a mutual relationship because it helps contextualize some of the conversations that the characters in Train to Pakistan are having. There's this weird thing that happens, right? Where you think if this is the Independence Day of the country, why aren't more people elated and excited? And I think what Singh is really trying to get across, at least through Iqbal, we don't know his last name right now, so I'll just call him Iqbal, is that this is terrifying. And it's terrifying for one because of the random acts of violence that are erupting, but it's also terrifying because it was indeed a relationship. Okay, so we have that, right? So we understand the importance India had in the British Empire. Another important event that I think is really important for us to know about is Jallianwala Bagh. It's also known as the massacre in Amritsar, happened in 1919. And so what you have here is just an eruption of violence. An order was given to kill a group, or at least shoot at a group of 3,000 people who were celebrating a holiday known as Baisakhi. And so what Jallianwala Bagh really became, though, is a signifier of the brutishness and just the awfulness of colonialism. So Britishers, Lord Dyer specifically, gave out the order to start shooting, and British forces started shooting, ultimately killing about 400 unarmed men, women, and children. And so it's important for us to see the role violence has played in the 50 years or maybe 40 years prior to the partition. People also, or researchers, scholars also note this as sort of the first time or a significant moment where the narrative of colonialism, at least colonialism in India, the narrative started to shift. And so you'll remember we talked about this mutual relationship in 1901. And in 1919, we have that sort of shift. We also have, around this time, Gandhi, we have Bhagat Singh, revolutionaries who start to more and more loudly say, maybe it's time that, we ruled ourselves. Okay, so we have that in 1919. Then World War II happens, and all of a sudden, Britain is broke. They can't necessarily afford to keep up with all of their empires. And so what you have is um, a more or a readiness to accept India's plea for self-rule. Of course, you don't want to discredit um, Bhagat Singh and Gandhi and all of those other folks who fought tirelessly to make self-rule a possibility. But the other very real um, thing that was happening is there was just not a lot of money going around to, one, support the resistance, to Indians' resistance, but also to support this idea of empire. Okay, so that happens, right? Then we have in 1947, uh, we have India's Independence Day. August 14th, 1947, India is finally granted their independence. August 15th, 1947, the borders, the boundaries between India and Pakistan are revealed, and everyone knows now what's Pakistan and what's India. Um, I think it's important, though, to understand that while Indians, um, politicians in India knew that independence was um, going to happen, there was a deadline set for 1948. So Lord Mountbatten, who was sort of the key figure in negotiations of, okay, so what will be India, what will be Pakistan, what will be East Pakistan, what will be West Pakistan. Prior to him, it was decided that in June of 1948, Britishers would officially leave India and no longer rule India. However, Lord Mountbatten, through negotiations between Gandhi, Nehru, who ultimately became the first Prime Minister of India, and Jinnah, who was the leader of the Muslim League Party, through those negotiations and through what was going on outside, because of course there were whispers of this division of India, Lord Mountbatten realized that it would be in his and Britishers' best interest if they left earlier rather than later, so that the communal acts of violence that were erupting and that were inevitably going to erupt later would not be blamed on the Britishers. In other words, they were supposed to leave in 1948, but Lord Mountbatten said maybe we should just peace out a little earlier because it looks like things are about to go a little crazy. So you have, again, we were talking about this mutual relationship, but then you can also imagine thinking that you were going to have a foreign presence or a foreign rule for one whole year extra, and then finding out that in fact that rule is going to be gone in a matter of days. So you have that. Then you also have the fact that prior to this Independence Day, prior to August 14th and post, everyone knew that there was going to be a division between Pakistan. There was going to be a division of India. The main reason being that the Muslim League Party wanted a land for Muslims exclusively. And so it was just a matter of where should the border be drawn. Now, clumsily, they decided to have this lawyer, Radcliffe, figure out the border. So, just imagine, it sounds like it's a minor task, but it's this huge deal, right? So he's looking at a map of over 400 million people at the time, and he determines who is going to be considered Indian and who's going to be part of this new nation called Pakistan. He had no experience in doing this. He didn't really know India at all. And so he used outdated maps, outdated railway systems, outdated maps of railway systems, and just the little knowledge he knew to draw up a border. And now what this border did is it split, uh, specifically it split Kashmir and it split Punjab. And so what happened then is India was born, and then the next day it was official that people who were living in Lahore, parts of Punjab, parts of Kashmir, if they weren't Muslim and they were on the Pakistani side, they needed to leave and go to India. And people who were Muslim on the Indian side needed to go to this new land of Pakistan. And so it's like one of those I think really interesting, complicated moments where you have pure joy, pure elation, because all of the sacrifices that revolutionaries like Bhagat Singh and Gandhi fought for were finally coming to fruition. But then you also had, 10 million people forced out of their homes into exile. A million of those who were murdered, and more who were raped, abducted, missing, etc. So that's just something that you want to consider and think about as you're reading Singh's narration of the partition. So on the day of independence, Nehru became the prime minister, and he acknowledged the violence that was going on with this veiled mention of labor pains. So he said, this is great, the birth of a new nation, but let's acknowledge the labor pains that we had to experience to get here. And so that's really the only place that we see real acknowledgement of the violence that was going on. Now, as you can imagine, it becomes really problematic that the loss of 1 million lives is mentioned through labor pains. One, it sort of tempts people, or tempts us into believing that the lives lost, or the partition, the exile, the 10 million people displaced from their home, it gives the illusion that this was something natural, something that needed to happen, right? Labor pains are a part of birthing, so it was necessary. And by automatically labeling the partition as necessary, there's very limited room for conversation about, what other things might have led to this kind of violence and what we're supposed to do after. So here, again, I talked to you about how the map or the physical location has changed. So here you'll see what I was talking about. So here is where, somewhere here actually, probably around here, is where Trains of Pakistan is taking place. And so when there's mention of the train, essentially the train is taking folks to and from this new border that's been established. And then for those of you who are interested in new historicism, 30 years later, Bangladesh was formed, and that was another sort of eruption of violence that has been narrated in literature in a very similar way that the partition has, where it's this idea of natural, what is inevitable, and what is self-imposed. So something to check out if you're interested, anything about the Bangladeshi independence movement. Specifically, I told you in class, a collection of poetry called Seam. So again, this is, I mean, there are so many images, but this is one image of sort of the exile forced through the partition. And now, where do we go from here, right? So now we understand that the partition was a huge historical event, and I mentioned in class that scholars try to work with the comparison between the partition and the Holocaust and what comes of comparing the two. But how do I want you to use this information in reading Train to Pakistan and any other work that we're reading for this class? There are really two specific ways. The first is understanding historical moments like this as a rupture, as a wound. And looking at literature as a remedy in healing this kind of wound. So if you're reading Train to Pakistan, in what ways or how is Singh trying to offer healing? But the other part of it, and I think this is the more innocuous part of it, is, and we talked about this with Renan, this act of forgetting. In what ways do you find, because we talked about how Nehru himself said, yeah, we suffered labor pains, and sort of that becomes the starting point of forgetting, right? Forgetting the real acts of violence and instead putting it or labeling, covering it as labor pains. So when you're reading works like Train to Pakistan, in what way are the characters sort of working with or working through this amnesia? In what ways are they forgetting? In what ways are they troubled because they can't forget? And in what ways are they actively distorting a historical reality in an effort to keep with this idea of the nation of India? So just to summarize really quickly, reading Train to Pakistan as a way to heal the wound of the partition, or reading Train to Pakistan as a symptom of the partition. And sort of either way you go, the characters change. If you look at Train to Pakistan as a way to heal, Iqbal and Jagga Singh become very different. Whereas if you look at them as symptoms, some of their beliefs and some of the things, specifically Jagga Singh and that scene with his girlfriend Nurun, become a little more complicated. So hopefully this helped the discussion that we already had. Feel free to comment here if you have any questions, or use this to support the conversations that you're having with your reading groups.